everyone. I'd like to get started. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Deanna Kulpa, who's an associate professor in the Department of Pathology and Laboratory Medicine at Emory Medical School. Dr. Kulpa began her training with a bachelor's in microbiology and immunology at Michigan State, Go Green, before completing her PhD in human genetics at the University of Michigan. At Emory, her work focuses on defining the mechanisms that promote HIV persistence in people living with HIV and identifying therapeutic strategies to counteract these mechanisms. In addition to leading her lab, Dr. Kulpa also is the director of virology and molecular biomarkers core and the director of the translational virology at the Center for AIDS Research at Emory. And today she's going to give us a talk on how science belongs to the community. So join me in welcoming Dr. Kulpa to our seminar.
So the only small correction I will make is I don't think today is a talk. I hope it's more of a conversation because one of the things that I think is important, I showed the title of Science Belongs to the Community. We are the community as well as everybody else is. So I don't like to think of it as a us against them. It's more of a we're all in this together. So how do we have this conversation? How do we talk about it? And one of the things that is part of that is actually part of the introduction that you just gave, which is when we talk about people living with HIV, it's a very specific and deliberate way of referring to people who have HIV. So the way we have that conversation is actually about, as I'll go through some of the slides that I have today, is actually how we talk not only to people, but about people, and sort of like having that, the sort of like making our language as being as inclusive as possible, so that when we have those conversations, everyone feels included and not necessarily like polarized or otherized.
Did not share your slides. Can you share?
Oh,
Zoom? So sorry. Can I hear everything? Yep, you're good. Sorry about that.
Okay, all right, I think we have at least other. Okay, so when we think about why we want to engage the community, or when we talk about actually having conversations with the community, one of the things that we want to do is cultivate trust and build a shared vision with community. And I think one of the things for me that why this is so important, especially in today's climate, is that something we've lost a lot of is trust. The scientific community in general has lost the trust of people in the United States. Specifically, I'm thinking probably in other parts of the world as well, but specifically in the United States, there has been a real loss of trust for probably a whole myriad of reasons. Some of them maybe accidental, just in terms of how we communicate with things, maybe like on our part not being, not knowing how to communicate well, as well as people actually kind of like working against communication and kind of fostering an atmosphere of wanting to build mistrust. So we have to actually work extra hard in terms of how we can are actually able to do that. And I think it's important that we do at all levels. So one of the things you can do when you're thinking about it as you're talking about giving a lecture, even as much as having a conversation one-on-one. And so to me, all of those things have value and all of those things are important to do and to do deliberately. One of the things that we try to do in our work is when we talk about early engagement, and that's really about engaging people in part of the process of basic science and not just whether or not something is a drug in a clinical study, but being able to how to be able to relate your science at all levels. The example I like to give is my mom and I back in COVID, when my mom was like, living with me for like 3 months during the time we were all shut in together. We had like a 3-hour conversation about chromosomal non-disjunction and what it means to have like literally no one had explained to her like what a trisomy was. I mean, we just got onto this conversation and I found like I was whiteboarding, like, mitosis and meiosis and what, And she was literally like, okay, this is new to me. And so just to be able, and she was someone who had no scientific training or background at all, was able to understand the entire conversation and was actually asking very, insightful questions like, I get it, what does this mean, and so it's very possible to have those sorts of like really engaging conversations with people, it just depends on how you do it. Identifying challenges to your study implementation. One of the things you don't want to do is to be able to say like, this thing I'm doing in the test tube today is going to result in a drug in a body tomorrow. Building sort of that unrealistic expectation or hope. There's sort of a balance between how do you communicate your process and progress at the same time, not saying, gosh, this is never going to lead anywhere. It's all a conversation, but I think it's also very important to keep having those conversations. Generating culturally appropriate solutions. Well, this is one of the things that, so you can see this slide deck has a lot to do with HIV. So one of the things that we deal a lot with is looking at how we can have conversations not only in different communities, but in different cultures in different countries across the world. How may we like change the way we have those sorts of conversations in different parts of the world versus even different parts of the United States. And then things that we focus a lot on is how we can make informed conversations with the community. And when I think of information, I think of it as a two-way street, like what can we learn and what can they learn? And these things are all very important. But I think one of the things that being in HIV research has taught me is to kind of begin with the end user at the beginning. So when we think, I work in HIV cure, so the conversation that we have all the time is how is this relevant? How is this relevant? How is this relevant? And we may still start from a place of this could work in a very specific context in a very, I'm thinking specifically of there's now been a handful of people who have been cured of HIV through bone marrow transplants. All very exciting, not really a cure that can be applicable and usable across the world. Not just for economic reasons, but biology, like no one wants to have a bone marrow transplant unless you have to have a bone marrow transplant. So, but to me, it's a hope, it's a proof of concept, it's a showing that we can do it. So therefore, pursuing other avenues to get to those same ends is worth doing. And then part of what we do in our work is staying engaged at all levels, which is me as a basic scientist, has just as much dialogue with the community as the clinician, as the person working in the animal models. And maybe my job is a little bit more difficult because I have to try to say like, it's really important that why this phosphorylation on this enzyme, happens in this one cell type, trust me. Because at the end, we're going to still be able to make that translatable into a cure or into a therapy at some point. But I think what's also important to know is that a lot of our organizations are on board with this. So if you go online, this is, for example, the American Association of Scientists. They have a communication toolkit. So I put the website in there. And this is essentially, there's a whole bunch of guidelines on how to have these conversations. This is not just like a personal movement, but this is a lot of these types of organizations are actually emphasizing how to have these conversations. And then what may be important to a researcher may not be the same thing that's important when you're talking about your particular work or these sorts of things to the public. And so really when you're having the conversation, basically, your really detailed information may not be as important as, how did you get there? What's the bottom line? What's the question? Things that are really a lot more relevant to public health. And as I mentioned earlier, language matters. So the NIAID, so the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease, has been working for a number of years to put together, essentially language, that has come from conversations that the scientists and individuals in the community have had, sort of coming together saying, when we're sitting in talks and we're listening to scientists or clinicians present their work, we want to hear things in a way that doesn't that's not basically an othering of us, the individuals who are being impacted by your work. So this has come through years and years of these sorts of conversations where actually NIAID first put out like a language template a number of years ago. They just updated it again earlier this year. And what that means in practical terms is that when I'm giving a talk, no matter who it's to, whether it's to a room full of scientists or a community organization, I use the same language. Like I don't change the way I talk about HIV or people living with HIV. I don't contextualize it to the audience essentially, because it's really about habit forming. We had heard this first came up probably at least 10 years ago, where I was in a talk, and there was a talk at the NIH, and there was a scientist who was on the stage and kept talking about HIV patients. And someone stood up in the audience afterwards and said, "Are you a physician? Do you treat people?" And he's like, "No, I'm a scientist." And I was like, "Then why are you talking about patients? These are not your patients. These are people." And so this conversation really got started around, should I, as a scientist, be talking about patients when that's not my relationship with the people who I'm working with in these studies? And at first it might seem like it's kind of a trivial thing, or do we really need to think about how we do that? But I think it's important. And it extended from, so we started shifting away from people calling and referring to patients in our papers and in talks, and we started talking in subjects. And the conversation came back again and said, we're not subjects, we're not lab rats. You aren't doing things to us, you know? And so what I thought was very interesting after watching this over the last decade is it wasn't ever fixed in stone, and it was always an evolving part of the conversation. And so now when we talk about people living with HIV, there are people living with HIV. And that's the way we have that conversation in the lab, as same as when we're on a stage, as when we're talking about people. It's essentially saying this is how we are referring to individuals who are part of our science. And to acknowledge that, whenever we refer to, like, this is coming from a particular person, we say that person is a participant. So they're not a donor, they're not a subject, they're not a patient, they're a participant. They provided their blood, their tissue, you know, whatever, they were part of the process. They actually donated their time as well as their actual material from themselves. They participated in our work, and so we call them participants, refer to them as participants. And what's interesting to me about this is that, like, it's a very simple thing to do, and it has so much meaning. Why not do it? I see colleagues who are very resistant to this still, and still want to talk about patients or whatever. And to me, I always point it out whenever I hear it, because it's still, like I said, it doesn't matter if I'm having that conversation in the hallway, if I'm having a conversation on a stage. I think that consistency is important, and because it's all about intent. And so I feel very comfortable sort of making that reminder. It does mean that sometimes you'll get put in uncomfortable situations. The last NIH meeting we had for our collaboratory. Sometimes old habits, like someone was like saying patient. Again, just sort of a slip and like they got called out on it. Like immediately, like the first person was up to the microphone going for not patients. It is, I think, something that's still important to consider and something that we can do. That's a very simple, straightforward thing to do. But I think that when we talk about community, it's, I think it's a part of that conversation, is a part of the fact that when we're talking to people, we're talking about people and with people, and that's part of it. And I'm very happy that institutions like AAS or NIH are on board with it. And this is just an example of some of the terms, like they literally put out like this whole booklet that was kind of giving examples of language in stigmatizing terms versus what is preferred, and even getting some background as to like what may be the rationale for changing some of these some of this type of language. And this was a slide that we put together as sort of like a reminder for the individuals in our collaboratory that when they're presenting as a part of our collaboratory, this is the sort of language that we are requesting people to use. So sort of then shifting into community engagement methods. One of the things that we have tried to do is to cultivate long-term relationships with community, and what that means for us is we have, and I'll go into this in a little bit more detail, some relationships with the Community Liaison Council through the Emory Center for AIDS Research. There are a number of HIV advocacy groups that we work with, and to be able to develop these types of relationships with people over time also means that you can have conversations that may never have happened with them otherwise. I'm thinking in particular of one woman who is part of our scientific advisory board, or sorry, our community advisory board, whose woman been living with HIV for 20 years, who has chosen not to take antiretroviral therapy, which is wild to me as someone she's very engaged as a community advisory board member. She's actually the chair of our community advisory board council for our own collaboratory. We actively work on antiretroviral therapies. We actually worked on antiretroviral cures, and here's someone who's saying, I don't want any part of your cure. But yet she's very engaged and involved in everything that we do. And she's actually an amazing community advisory board member. And it's given an opportunity for me to hear what she's thinking about why she's made the decision that she has, but she's still very involved in wanting to be a part of what the research community is doing and wanting to know about it and learn more about it, even if she personally is deciding, I don't want to participate in it. Which is, it's an experience I never thought would happen. I just sort of, I guess, assumed the people who were really invested in being involved in the research part of it, or being involved as much as she is, would be like, I want to be first in line when you have a cure, or when you have, something to try. And for her, it's like, oh, don't want any part of it. But I want to be involved in, like, I want to know what you're doing, because I want to be able to talk about it and I want to be able to understand it. So it's a very, to me, it's an incredible opportunity to have these sort of relationships and to cultivate them over a long period of time where, for me, I hope that when we do develop a cure, that is something that if she has learned to trust in us and what we do, that this is something that she could potentially feel comfortable in doing. And I really hope we make that cure available for her. So that's something that she has enough access to in her lifetime. But I think one of the biggest things for me to have to get on board with was to seek opportunities to learn. For a long time, I was in the keep my head down, I gotta do my research, I gotta get stuff done, I gotta write my papers, I gotta do this, and being involved in other aspects of HIV research, which includes working, with the community, is specifically in advocacy and testing, is that, it's not something that's necessarily accepted by a lot of my peers, weirdly. It is kind of looked at as like, why are you doing that? Why are you bothering? You know, why are we putting so much effort into doing this? It's not really looked at or necessarily accepted as something that's worth your time, because it's taking away from your research time, which is, again, wild. So at least in my experience, that sort of like support for doing that has not been there. So I try to make a big point of people in my lab, to do that, to find these opportunities, to make them available to them if they don't know about them, to let them know where these opportunities are. And that to me, again, is wild, because we are all part of the community. We aren't separate from them. Why aren't we having those conversations? Why aren't we being a part of that? It's just, it takes all kinds kind of situation, I think, but for that, to me, that what that means is that you actually have to like look for those opportunities, because they may not necessarily be there as a part of your regular program, part of your regular education. Just because they're not, that's not the focus. The focus is getting your degree or getting your fellowship, you know, whatever. Those are always going to be like the things that are at the top of the list. As well as seeking opportunities to educate. And I look at that as not just going to a senior center and giving a presentation on what you do, but having your conversations with your neighbors and your friends. And then learning how to communicate, I think, is something that everyone can do, and everyone can learn how to shape the language of science into something that is digestible for everyone. And it's not just possible, but it's important. And I think it's, given today's climate in the world, even more important that we are able to do that, and we do it as much as possible. So as far as different opportunities, like this is specific to what we do, but this is our Martin Delaney Collaboratory for HIV research. So our Race HIV Collaboratory came from this particular request for applications, but within this RFA was actually a requirement for community engagement. So this sort of like, I think it's interesting that part of the NIH in building this Martin Delaney Collaboratory opportunity is we actually were required to have a community partner, actually required to have our community advisory board, our community engagement coordinator. And we ended up through that actually developing relationships with multiple partners. And what I think that has been an opportunity for us that was unexpected on my end was we actually have two different partners that we work with now. One is Sister Love, which is led by Deanna Dixon Diallo. This is, she founded Sister Love over 30 years now, that was focused originally on reproductive justice and has expanded into testing, HIV testing for women. And then involving women of color in HIV community awareness and HIV participation in HIV clinical studies. We've also partnered with the Reggie Smith Foundation, and Reggie he founded his foundation based on the fact that as an HIV positive male who is heterosexual, he felt that there was a voice in the HIV community that was really underrepresented in terms of the stigma that he often has experienced as being someone living with HIV who is not gay. And in the United States, that is a big stigma as a part of HIV culture and community. And so he started his foundation to sort of bring awareness to that. So we've actually partnered with a couple of different advocacy groups. And which again, has given us sort of an interesting and different perspective than I normally get as a part of HIV research. When we developed the Erase HIV program, part of our, I guess, our statement that we made as part of what we want to be and who we are was to be able to deliver community supported therapeutics. And so that is part of the conversation that we have always had with our community advisory board. And they have been part of our conversation and our scientific talks through every part of this, a part of our collaboratory. And through this, we have adopted, in every scientific talk we give, a plain language summary slide. And this is again, whether I'm addressing a small research focus group at the university or at a big conference. The plain language summary slide is a way of being able to relate your research in a more plain language, I guess, for lack of a better word, for accessibility. And we always put it at the beginning, because we want to be able to introduce the idea, even if like as scientists, we want to be able to have a punchline, you know, you're like building up your story and you want to be able to like, you know, the final slide is, you know, this is in order to be able to be effective communicators with the community who are often at our talks at scientific communities and scientific conferences, to be able to give the highlights and then even the punchline at the very beginning gives them a way of being able to follow along. And frankly, a lot of scientific talks, I would benefit from this as well. To be able to have kind of the scope and to know what I'm looking for and to kind of get a Cliff Notes version essentially of the talk beforehand. It actually kind of helps me understand it as well. So I think that was something that still, again, a lot of scientists I know are rather resistant to this idea. And even if we ask them to put it at the beginning, they still want to put it at the end because they want to be able to save it. But again, like when you're giving a presentation, if you're wanting to, you know, reach everybody to be able to break it down and say, this is what to look for. This is what I'm showing you. And then to be able to like move through the different parts. The feedback that we've gotten is from this slide, I can really understand what you're going to get into. And then it actually helps me ask questions at the end. And I've gotten really, really positive feedback from having presented in this way. And so we just call it a plain language summary. And, you know, the idea is it shouldn't be, I think there's too many words. I just grabbed an example of one of my collaborators, but, you know, having pictures or having, you know, something, and again, it's like presented in a way that's really easy to grasp. It shouldn't be the world's, you know, longest paragraph that someone has to try to read through, and to use language that is, you know, basically make the assumption that, you know, if you're sitting in a talk, you know what HIV is, you probably know what T cells are, but you maybe don't know what beta-catenin is. So maybe find different ways of describing different pathways as you're looking at, and maybe, but most specifically, why do we care? Why should we care? And I think this is one of the things that we've adopted into our way of presenting our science. That is just very easy to incorporate and this keeps everybody on the same page. So I would suggest, could be something that you would want to do as well. And I think this is probably my last slide. So when I talked about like seeking opportunities, to have these sort of conversations, they're everywhere. You just kind of have to look for them. One of the things I started doing years ago was Skype with a scientist. They still call it Skype with a scientist, even though I think we just do Zoom now, but at the time Skype was the thing and it just sort of stuck. it's a really fun program, where, you get matched with, schools, across the United States who have, depends on what it is, whether it could be a high school biology class, an elementary class. The example I put up here was, a sixth grade class. They may be talking about a particular unit, they may be talking about something in general. And so you get matched with teachers and then get brought in virtually into the classroom. And I have done them at all levels. I've, done from, elementary school, middle schoolers up to, your seniors in high school or thinking about the next phase of their career. So you get people asking all different types of questions. It's a lot of fun, especially the little kids are great. They're really engaged. And that's also an opportunity of being able to, shape your presentation based on the age level that you're working with, whether you're talking to high school seniors who maybe have an interest in biology to kids who are like, what's a virus, and so to be able to kind of talk to them about these different things. It's a really fun program. I've been doing it for a number of years now. But as I said, there's a lot of different opportunities. This is one that I put up that we just had recently, the Senior University of Greater Atlanta. They have a seminar series where they, saying like anybody who wants to come in and present their work. So I had actually two people from my lab, a lab technician and a postdoc, both decided they wanted to do it and participate in this program. To be able to kind of have that experience and give like a general presentation of their work to a unique audience. So there's lots of opportunities for these sorts of things. You just kind of have to look for them and find them. But they're there and they are work because that is something extra you have to do. But to me, it's so worth it. And you may not reach everybody, but you'll reach even one person. It really, it matters. It matters to that one person and it matters to you. So, that's about it. And this is the reason for what I do. This person who's standing next to me is Adam Castillo. He's the second person who's been cured of HIV in the whole wide world. And, he's part of our community advisory board. And he's a big motivator for what we do. One of the things that, his title is the Ambassador of Hope. So he goes around and talks to a lot of people about basically providing that kind of hope for a cure. And what I love about Adam is he actually came and said, I had HIV, then he had cancer. He needed to have a bone marrow transplant for his cancer. So he ended up getting a bone marrow transplant that cured him of his HIV. But he wasn't a scientist and didn't have a scientist background. So now he's like in the middle of this world of people who are very interested in him as a biological subject. And he wanted to understand what were people interested in me for. And so literally spent an entire day of, I want to learn these scientific terms. I want to understand better the biology of what happened to me and what this disease is doing and how I can better talk to other people about it. And so he is an amazing ambassador in that respect. He's tirelessly travels to talk to people now and has learned a lot. But yeah, and I guess that was me talking a lot. So are there any sort of questions or conversations anybody I assume wants to add to that?
Thought, like it made me think about like the kids who are born with HIV. So, I think these platforms, like, I don't know, just, them attending schools and being around other children, and I think having this education platform even at that level would be very nice. So the kids can understand, these are born with HIV. How
I think that there's so many reasons for it. One is to be able to understand, other kids around them, but also kids grow up to be adults who vote. And that to me is a big part of why I talk to the community, not just to be a part of understanding, the HIV community, but, to be able to, I guess, specifically when I'm talking to like the high school students who seem to be sort of like on that cusp of moving into the next phase of their life, when they're thinking a lot about what they're doing is, why did I learn this? How does this matter to me? You know, I'm gonna graduate and go get a job and do something, and I'm never gonna do calculus again. Why do I care about this? Why do I care about any of this? And the thing to sort of try to like remind people is that your life as an adult also includes being a part of the government process. And you might be asked to vote on things that come from an understanding, at least, of science. Do we want to be able to use fetal tissue in cancer research? And maybe that won't matter to you when you're 18, but maybe you have a grandparent who has cancer and would, you know, maybe you can connect something about the research that's being done and how that's important for, you know, for people's health. And being able to be informed about what that means and what that might look like or understand of it. I think is part of like the message that I try to give is like, you don't need to think like, okay, what is ATP? As much as being able to appreciate the biology of that impacts us every day. And then civically, we're gonna be asked to be a part of the decision-making process for how that's used. And you can at least approach it from a sense of it's not like all scary, but something that's approachable, then I think that's, if you can do that for at least one person, you've done something important.
I have a couple questions online.
Oh, sorry.
First one is from Lewis. Can PhD students participate in Skype with a scientist?
Yes. Just sign up online, like, I think if you go back to, I put the website down in the corner, skypescientist.com. If you just go onto it, if you're a teacher or administrator, like you can click on there as like, you know, find me a scientist, and if you're a scientist, you can find me a teacher, and get connected with, and again, like, because it's Skype or Zoom, it's, you know, anywhere in the country, so, you know, it's a really fun program.
Great. All right, next question is from Natalie. She asked, can you recommend any resources for developing plain language summaries?
That's a really good question. Everything that I've done has been all a part of trial and error. What I think of as plain language, I get feedback that says that's not so plain. And also watching other people and thinking, oh my God, that's a bit much. And what we actually have done is, and this is probably not helpful at all, our community and advisory board member, that I was talking about, we actually send our plain language summary slides to her and ask her to read them before, you know, we give her presentation. And she is, like I said, she's very invested and gives very generously of her time, and will review our plain language summary and be like, okay, and no, that's like, I couldn't follow that at all, or, you know, and she gives us some good feedback. So, send it to your mom, you know, send it to a friend and see if they can get it. If there's things that seem obvious to you, may pop out as like, yeah, I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. And there's your feedback right there.
Just gonna maybe add to that. So there is at Emory, we have the writing center that have some people that can help, you know, develop some of these things. So that is something that people could turn to. But then the other thing, like you mentioned, it's, you know, if it has to be understandable, you just ask someone, you know. So I think the writing center can help you with some general rules, but then having someone read it and they're gonna say, I don't even understand that sentence structure, right? And it's like, okay, so you just really start thinking about how to make that easier.
Yeah, it's really been for me, like seeing this process kind of in action, the ones that are like, oh yeah, I wanna do that. Because like I said, sometimes the picture or just does something that really kind of breaks it down. And other people like, put in like an abstract and they're like, okay, it's not gonna help anybody, whether it's community or not, like that's just a lot of words to try to like read.
And it's also a lot of things, because I looked at the summary that you showed earlier, and that was still, for people, you needed to know what a CD8 T cell
Exactly.
is, right?
Okay.
But then, so there's simple ways of saying, when you throw it at someone with CD8 T cell, you kind of assume that person knows it, but you can do tricks where you say cells that scientists refer to as CD8 T cells. It's like, oh, it's a type of cell and I don't need to know what it is.
Yeah.
Right, so there's little things where you say, okay, I know you may not know this, but I'll just give you a description of what we mean with it.
Especially because like I said, like I know it's people are very resistant to putting it at the beginning of their talk, but also when you introduce it that way, it gives you a way of being able to say, you're gonna hear a lot about CD8 T cells. And this is why they're important, and so the next 15 slides, I'm gonna say CD8 over and over and over again. And so then you basically don't have to wait until the end to explain to them what a CD8 T cell is. Most of them, yeah.
So I was wondering, what are some of the things that you've learned about being a science communicator in the community from the people who are in the community that you do during these conversations? Because I have to imagine like sort of the default community communication style with between like researchers and just like, way people with HIV is pretty different. So what have you all learned, like maybe from each other?
I would say that, the thing that has, I guess, surprised me, maybe I shouldn't say surprised me the most. There's certainly a lot of passion for HIV cure and research, understandably. But I think that, what people are interested in is, a cure or a therapy that, doesn't hurt. And this is a weird way of saying, part of what I see the mistrust of, big pharma is this idea that, that it's all about money. And they're just making drugs to make money. And, the person that I was talking about, who has decided not to take antiretroviral therapy, that is her main reason, is because people are just wanting me to take drugs to make money. There's a true mistrust of like, why were those drugs made in the first place? Were they made for me, or were they made for somebody's profit? And it's very hard for me as a basic scientist whose intentions are pure, because I have no skin in that game, right? I am not gonna make a dime over anything that I do. So, what I think about is like, well, of course, this is gonna be good for you. Like, well, everything I'm doing is because I want this to result in a cure or a therapy or something that's gonna make your life better. And so I come in from a very naive standpoint of thinking, of course we want this to be good. And then of course, between me and there is a whole lot of other stuff that is not true. And so that part of that mistrust comes from, and I think this is just in general, not even to HIV in particular, but a mistrust of, why do you want me to take this drug? Is it really gonna help me, or is it about the fact that you can sell me a drug? The whole like, they want us to have cancer because, if we have cancer, we'll keep making money sort of thing. They've got a cure for cancer. They've had it for years. Like how many times have I heard that, that, so there is that sort of like, even if you don't believe it, it's in the back of your head. And so even if there is that excitement about a cure, there is still a mistrust of, a cure is great in this abstract, but in a reality is, if I give you a pill, are you gonna wanna take it? Because what are you really doing to me? And that to me was, I think, something that I haven't really internalized. Not in that sense. Because I just come out again from this like, well, of course it's good for you. But if you've ever taken AZT, it's not good for you, a lot of the stuff that they, that we do ends up being toxic. So can you blame people for being suspicious? A lot of the side effects associated with antiretroviral therapy, there's some people who stop taking their medication because they just can't deal with the side effects. It may work okay for some people, and others, it's just a disaster. They'd rather go without. So yeah, I think the mistrust is deserved. So we have to keep earning it. Yeah.
It sounds like community engagement is a core part of the collaboratory that you mentioned specifically. Within this funding source or with other funding sources though, are there ever times where there's contention between what you're funded to do and what the community says that they want?
I could say the closest that I've come to that is, again, that feeling of, an example I'll give you is right now, there's a lot of, development, being put into long-acting antiretroviral therapy. So instead of taking a daily, we went from, in HIV, we went from having to take 30 medicines a day in various forms of liquids that we need to be refrigerated, and injections and pills, to, one pill that's 3 drugs, in total, and it's a once a day pill and you're done. And so to go from there to there is an amazing feat. And now people are looking at, okay, can you develop something that you wear like a patch that is delivering long acting medicine for 6 months? Do an injection that lasts for 6 months, once a year injection. And there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about that approach. Given thinking, well, if you don't want to take a pill every day, like just once every 3 months, going and get a shot, that's amazing. Then you can be done with it. And surprisingly to hear the feedback on that was, no, I don't want that. That was again, like this feeling like, okay, a bunch of people are putting a lot of effort into making this happen and developing these types of, the pharmacology of that to make that, bioavailable for 6 months or whatever, is a huge investment. And if in the end, the community is over here saying, I'm good with a pill a day, I'm not really gonna go into a clinic, once every 3 months for a shot, no, thank you. What do we do? So it's like stuff like that, that's where, when I think about having the conversation at the beginning, that's where that's where my brain goes, is this feeling like, okay, we can do that, but is that what the community is looking for? And yeah, that's an example that comes into my head.
How do you approach situations where there might be some disagreement in the community about what is needed for a particular drug intervention for each?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when I say the community, and again, which is why I like to say we are part of the community, because the community is not a monolith, right? And for that, I think that's where having the conversation early and often matters. Because you can make that point very clearly that there are going to be approaches that are going to be really important for some populations. When we talk about mother to child transmission, for example, pediatric versus adult care, someone who's been living with HIV for 30 years versus someone who was recently exposed. So they're actually very different patient populations. Participant question. See, I just did it. And again, I use HIV because that's my background, but we're talking about people who may have acquired it through drug abuse versus sexual contact. Those are very distinct populations in terms of what they're looking for, and how we actually interact with them. And I actually there's several cohorts that I've worked with that are drug using versus individuals who have been exposed through, sexual contact, and they're very different relationships. So, that's part of the conversation, and it definitely impacts the people's perspective for why they're interested in what you're doing and what they're willing to accept from it. Sorry, we have time.
Yeah, we have time. I was just gonna add so it's nice that you showed that the senior University of Georgia is actually a really great place to be, because it's one of those times where you go to a place where everyone in the room wants to be there. And so it's a really great opportunity actually to talk about your science. And it's a lot of retired people. A lot of them are scientists, but in completely different fields, and they're super excited to be there and to learn. So it's definitely a recommendation. And the other thing I was gonna say, there's a lot of opportunities beyond this, for example, through the Atlanta Science Festival. So if you want to be involved in anything like this, you can write to Jordan Rose, who is the director of that, and we can provide all the details. But they have all sorts of programs to go to local schools or to meet a scientist events and all sorts of things. So if it's something that anyone here is interested in, those are definitely options. And that can be throughout the year. It can also be during the festival, which is in March, but there's a lot of options. And for those of you who are writing NSF proposals, GRFPs, and you need broader impacts, that is the place to go, because they're really, really good at hooking you up with people actually doing something meaningful. But I love the idea of a public, plain language summary. I think I'm gonna do that. Maybe even print it out and give it to people so they can keep track. This is about.
Yeah, that's been, we've done it over the past 2 years now, we've been doing it, and like I said, for me, even I love it. But like I said, it's really hard to get some scientists to want to do it, because they're like, no, I have this way I tell the story.
Yeah, but as scientists, we also should know that the more often you hear something, the better you remember it.
Oh, 100%.
So if you say it at the start, by the time you get it, people have already forgotten, and then they relearn it, and then they'll remember it.
Exactly.
It's way better.
No, it's good. All right, thank you.